Hello and welcome to my Fiber Chats. And today my guest is Helena Hovitz-Riegel. And Helena is an author, journalist, editor, mental health enthusiast, and dog saver, and
Yeah.
knitwear designer, like to top it all off. And I mean, we'll talk about a little bit of all of that, but I want to start with your book.
Okay.
So you wrote a book called After 9/11, One Girl's Journey Through Darkness to a New Beginning. And
Yes.
as the name suggests, it's about 9/11. So tell us about how this book came to life and what happened.
Sure. So I'll start by saying that I think there's definitely a healthy avoidance of this topic out there. So I'm going to try to keep it very light for the folks that are tuning in for the Fiber Chats part. But, I would say that the shortest way I can condense, what my experience was, very few people know that there were children and families living and going to school right by the World Trade Center. And I was 12 years old and fit into both of those categories. I was in school 3 blocks away and I lived 3 blocks away. And I was caught in the middle of everything from start to finish, everything that we've all seen now on the news. And although there's no way that there could ever be a way to convey the experience of what it's like to be 12 years old and running from collapsing buildings and seeing people, all the things. I don't want to trigger anyone, but all the things. And we lived on this, a few blocks away in what became a war zone, basically. Like the National Guard was here. We didn't have power. Like no one was allowed in or out. There were threats of more buildings falling. And what happened was I grew up as a teenager in New York with I knew something was wrong, but like me and my parents had never really even considered PTSD, and none of the many therapists and psychologists that I saw said anything about PTSD. So I went through my teenage years going through, what an adolescent would go through, but like amplified with all these really extreme responses, mostly fear-based, like fight or flight. And I approached, everything, my relationships, my schoolwork, everything, commuting to and from high school, and with these very complex symptoms of PTSD, and getting all these different diagnoses that were not correct, and I was being medicated, and it didn't work. And finally, when I was 18, I found the right kind of help, and that's when I started to be able to rebuild my life. And so because when you go through something traumatic like that, your brain actually changes, like just things change, and your response to the world and the people in it and your experience of it changes, and it's not good. And so I finally found recovery, and that led to recovery from alcoholism. Often addiction and alcoholism can come hand in hand with PTSD. And so in November I'll have 10 years sober, which is exciting. I got sober when I was 22. And the book to me felt really important, not just because there are so many people who don't know my story and the stories of my classmates and my neighbors and New Yorkers, but because there's so much, especially now. I mean, look at the year we had. There's so much exposure to traumatic events, save for things like COVID and, violence from protests and California wildfires. There are millions of kids and adults who live with trauma, whether it's from a natural disaster or something going on at home, or a ton of reasons. And we don't know enough about it. We don't know the symptoms. And so for me, it was about spreading awareness of this is, I went back and interviewed all my classmates as well, and heard them saying the same things about what it was like to grow up. I just wanted to stay shut in my room and not talk to anyone. I was constantly afraid. Like I would go somewhere and check for the exits and figure out where the next, threat could be coming from. I couldn't trust anyone. Like I cut people off when I thought they were trying to hurt me. It was just, and I said that these are all things that they're not you. They're not something that's wrong with you. They're a response to something that happened to you. And there is a better way. Like this doesn't have to be who you are for, this doesn't have to be your experience. And so it's been really important to me to say, whatever you're going through, there's always help. And there's, a lot of what I hear from folks also is that, talk therapy isn't helpful. People go and they talk about it and then they leave and they feel worse because they brought up these memories, which is why, raising awareness for specific types of therapy that's really effective for trauma, anxiety, all these things, felt so crucial. And now, we have the 20th anniversary coming up, and we've also come out of such a difficult year where there's so many people that were affected, whether it was just someone caught something, or the healthcare workers, the journalists, like the people who were on the front lines. And so for me, it was really hard to keep going as a 15, 16, 17-year-old, feeling like I kept looking for help and not getting better, getting worse. And so for me, being fortunate enough to have put in all this hard work, found the right kind of therapies, and come out as far on the other side as someone could, trauma, like addiction, it's always going to live with you a little bit, but you can find a new life. You can find yourself. You can find peace and comfort and calm. And for me, it's really such a gift that I can still be in Lower Manhattan and be okay.
Right. I mean, and I find it interesting that the point that you bring, that we have this thing that like children don't get as affected by events as adults, and like they more resilient, and they just like have their own bubble that they live in, and so they sort of move on faster and they survive better and they don't get as affected. And obviously that's not true. And I just like find it very interesting that like, I think it's very important that you brought that in your book to show that that's not true, that like people more aware of what kids actually go through and how it's probably even more traumatic for them.
For sure, because adults, or even like young adults, they have more awareness of just the world, and they have more ready access to resources, and kids, we grow up just as, if you're lucky, assuming that the world is safe and your parents will always be there to take care of you. And in the most violent of ways, I learned the hard way very abruptly that that's not true, right? And so I think kids are born with resilience, as are adults. Like, we all have resilience in us, and that's driven by hope. But you can keep, just because a body stays in motion doesn't mean that we're unchanged in ways that we really need to look at to try to cope better and move forward through life in a way that's much better.
Right. And then so at some point, your knitting also came in place when you were fighting your addiction, right?
I wouldn't say that. I would say, I was sober I learned to knit in 2018, in January of 2018. And I had been sober for 7 years by then. And so, but what I did find after I started knitting and becoming absolutely obsessed, after I learned that first stitch, that was it, is, naturally journalist that I am, I started doing research and finding that knitting is extremely good for your mental health. It's good for your physical health. And there are tons of studies that show that. So when I learned that, after I learned to knit, I was like, oh, great. Like, this is actually also not just this beautiful, creative, wonderful thing I've learned, but it's actually got these other benefits. And so that was just an additional exciting thing to learn.
Do you remember like the first time you considered knitting? Like, what brought that on?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't mention this too often, but I first learned to knit technically when I was 14. I had an aunt who lived in Vermont, and she was like, let's go to the yarn store and learn. And I picked out like the worst yarn you could learn to knit with. It was like this, what do you call it? Not like terry cloth, but very like, this
Love that.
novelty yarn essentially, where like you could, like even now I like where I am now, like maybe I'd be able to see a mistake, like even as advanced as I've become, but this was not a good starter yarn. And I think like the woman who owned like the yarn store tried to tell me, but I was 14 and I wasn't having it. I was like, no, this is cool. And so what ended up happening was, you know, I brought it home, I made a mistake. There was no YouTube. There was no, like, I didn't know the first thing about finding where a yarn store would be. You know, there was no Facebook. Like, so I was just, I found a neighbor who I knew knit, and I was like, could you fix this mistake? And she gave it back to me done. She gave me the whole blanket done. And I was like, I just wanted you to fix the mistake. So I kind of, that was that. And, you know, I was on the list for the newsletter of this nonprofit that, you know, I was helping them out with some stuff too that offers, you know, all these amazing free like events and classes for young people who are new in sobriety. And so I didn't quite fit that bill because I'd been so far along in my sobriety. But you know, I got the email and I took it as a sign. I was like, you know, I've always wanted to pick this back up again. And so I went and I wrote on my name tag like Helena who can't knit. And I told the teacher, I went up to her, I was like, listen, don't feel bad when you can't teach me because like I was like, you're wonderful, like this is not, I'm not. And it was unbelievable. She showed me and I got it on the first try and I was like, what? And she's like, that's your muscle memory, honey. Like that's like your body remembers what you learned.
That's
like,
so funny because like
lifetime
I think it's so true because like my
Yeah.
grandma taught me to knit when I was like 6 or 7, and
Yeah.
I spent with her like just like about a month in the summer, and she just showed me at some point like knit and purl stitches.
Yeah.
And then I came home and that was the end of my knitting for like 40 something years.
Yeah.
And then when I decided to try it again, I opened YouTube channel, I saw it and I was like, I think I still sort of remember. And it's like, as soon as I put the yarn on the needles, my hand went flying. Like it's totally a muscle memory. Somehow it's like stays with, it's like riding a bike, I guess.
There was no stopping me after that. I think I have, I think lots of your guests have probably said this, but I've only been knitting 3.5 years and I already have I have yarn that would exceed like 8 lifetimes at this point. But
I consider collecting yarn to be a completely different hobby. And that's like, as soon as you think that way, it's all becoming fine, you know?
Yes, it's collecting. And you know, as yarn doesn't expire, it doesn't go bad. Like, yeah, it's always an investment, right?
So let's talk about like, okay, you learn how to knit, but how do you go from learning how to knit to suddenly becoming a knitwear designer?
By accident. It was totally an accident. I got a request from a Facebook friend to make something for her. And so I made it for her, put aside, because at this point I was starting to feel empowered to knit up stuff without patterns. Because until then I had been following, you know, the free patterns on Ravelry. Then when I started to get more comfortable, I bought some patterns on Ravelry. But, you know, I felt like, okay, let me do my own thing and make this for her because I know enough to know how. So that was done. And then I had a question that I wanted to ask in one of the knitting groups that was like, had nothing to do with this shawl that I made. But you need a picture for the most part, right? So I was just like, picture of this thing I made. And it was a totally unrelated question. And everyone started commenting, asking for the pattern. And so I messaged my friend, Jessica, who she's the knitaholic on Facebook and Instagram. And I messaged her and I said, hey, like, people are asking for the pattern. And she's like, do it. And I'm like, I'm not a designer. What do I do? And she's like, well, I'll help you because Jessica's been knitting her whole life and she's worked with so many wonderful designers and she's a technical editor. And she's like, I'll help you. And you should charge people for it too, for your work. And I was like, no, like no one's gonna. And I thought, well, wait, you know, because this was actually right when we were like about a month into COVID. This was probably about like March or April of last year. And I was like, you know what? I've really been wanting to, you know, because you know, in my career as a writer and editor journalist, you know, things had come to a bit of a standstill too because of what was going on in the world. And I was like, okay, because giving back has always been very important to me in my journalism and my personal life. Ever since I was young, I was raised that way. And so it was really in me. So I thought, what if I give 25% of this pattern, which was only like $3 or something to animal rescue, and then I will feel okay. Because by the time, by the time everyone takes fees like PayPal and whatever, like I break even. But let's make this a fundraiser for animal rescue. And I got so excited that there were people that wanted to test knit it too. Like it was so wild. I was like, okay, I just went with it. And I was like, oh, you've never tested before? Come on down. I kind of made it. And it was such a gift because in that year, like, not only did it give me a new sense of purpose, but it was like it created this kind of community. And I think for folks who were used to having structure in their days and deadlines and stuff, like giving them a project and saying, here's the deadline, was great for them too. That's the feedback that I got. And so I just kept doing it, and I kept coming up with ideas, because most of where I get my inspiration from is what's not out there yet that I would want to wear.
Well, how do you think you changed? Like, remember that girl a year ago, right? The first design, the first like unsureness about how to go about it in comparison to, let's say, your last design that you've done.
Oh my gosh. I am still so incredibly humbled that I've gotten the responses I've gotten, especially to some of my more recent designs. I still am incredibly blown away that there are dyers who are like well established who want to work with me on shawls and shawl kits. I'm like that people want to test what I make, that there are people who have been very who have become real friends, like that I met through the knitting. And, I think that I've got some more confidence in my abilities, but I'm learning as I go too. Like my first shawl with slip stitches, like my testers are like, this is my first time. You think I could do it? I'm like, I did it for the first time a month ago, so you could do it, And it's been really exciting to have folks kind of learn as I learn. Like, I think what you might see is as time went on, my designs became a little bit more, not like necessarily complicated, but it went from I think they'll always be beginner, advanced, beginner friendly, but I'm kind of like learning techniques as I go. And so it'll probably be like, oh, there she goes doing some more intricate lace, or there she goes using several colors, or mosaic. Like it's so great. It's so great. Like I learn it, and then I'm just blown away at the feedback that I get. So I if anything, I'm just like, I'll keep doing this as long as people keep wanting to make this. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because like the first time I was asked to test knit something, I actually like never even thought about test knitting, right? I just posted my picture in one of the knitting groups, and this lady DM'd me and she said, well, I always like saw your work and I admire your work. Would you ever consider testing for me? And I was like, oh my God, like I've never done it. And she's like, perfect, here, And I find that I feel like such a trust, like when the designer trusts me with their project, because they put more trust in me than I put in myself often. Because like it's like I had times when Julie Knits in Paris sends me this sweater. I never knitted a sweater in my life. Right. And I was like, how I'm gonna do it? I have no experience. She's like, there's a pattern. It's all written there. You should be able to, and it's really empowering to feel that trust from the designer, like as a tester.
Yeah, that's so good to hear. That's so interesting because, I think I'm the kind of knitter where like, obviously for designs, I take a more careful approach, but in my knitting, like I'm the kind of knitter where I know there are folks who will like see a wrong stitch and frog back 10 rows, and I'll just be like, this is the pattern. Like if I make a mistake, I'm like, guess it's going in a different direction because I'm not ripping this out. Or I'll be like, no one will see that mistake,
Well, it's funny because I asked Hazel Tyndall that. I was like, how do you, because, everybody knows Hazel Tyndall, like she's such a legend. And I was like, well, and she was showing me a sweater that she was working on. And she's like, can you spot the mistake? Because I got like, my mind got the way I was
Yeah.
talking to people, and it just like happened there. And so I asked her, how do you deal with your mistakes? Like, do you have to like rip it all back out? And she's like, well, if a meter on the galloping horse doesn't see it, it's probably good enough to stay there.
Yeah, exactly. Like, obviously, you know, when I'm designing something, if I need to take back, I take back. But there are a couple ways that actually, you know, I see you're wearing very graciously that, you know, shawl that I made called Fired Up. And, um, little known fact, just an insider tidbit, it actually was originally in my mind going to have two of those lace panels separated by stripes. And I just was like, my gut's telling me to go a different way. And I always kind of feel like I follow what the yarn or the design wants to do. Like sometimes I have an idea, I know exactly what I want, we get it executed that way. But I leave myself open to saying, huh, what about this, even though it's already underway? And like with the lilacs and marigolds shawl that I just had come out, I had these two colors that I knew went together. I had a loose idea, but I literally let the yarn tell me what it wanted to do, and I just went with it. And I was like, oh, I hope like
It's beautiful. I really like that shawl.
thank you. Yeah, the response, I'm still like, I can't believe it's even happening. Like Selena, Sweater Sisters Designs, who did the kits with me, she was like, this was so smooth for like a first time, this
Right.
went so smooth, they're moving so quickly. And I'm just like, what? Like, it's so
I know
hard
what
for me
I find also interesting with your testers specifically, because it's like a bunch of pictures came out almost at the same time, and suddenly you see like all this variety of colors, and you're like, I really love that. No, wait, no, I really love that. It's just like so amazing to see like what people come up with.
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure too, like the colors, I kind of, she has so many pretty colors that complement each other. And so we went through and kind of picked out the colors sets that we thought would look best, and then said to the testers, whichever one speaks to you, make this one,
Right, right.
because to me the most important thing with my testers too is I approach this as so much more of a community activity, if you
Right.
will. So like to me, I just want people to be happy with what they're making. I want them to like the colors. I just had a tester saying like, oh, I actually don't like this second color. Can I change it? I was like, yeah, like I want you to love it, and I think because I still have such a hard time looking at myself as like someone who does this like professionally, because to me it's just like, oh, I get to knit, and then I get to have great, folks come in and knit it too, and then I get to
Right.
share it, and then I get to donate to a different animal rescue every month. So it kind of feels like it's just like this passion that I'm kind of like, everyone come and like everyone do it, and I just it's just such a rewarding, fun thing for me. And so I kind of feel like I'm in this in between spot between just a knitter and a professional designer who does it full time. I'm kind of in this middle place where so it gets to be, to me, like if I start to get then I know that I need to take a step back and be like, this is a happy place. And for my testers too, I'm like, I just want great photos and, have a good time, and please try and finish by the deadline if you can. And, thank you. And so, yeah, to me, that's the most important thing, is that everyone's having fun. And the fundraising aspect of it is I think probably one of the biggest parts.
Let's talk about that. So
Yeah.
how did you, why dog rescues? How did you come up with it originally? Like, what's your story about it?
Yeah. So, as a journalist, I covered so many different nonprofits, but the ones that have always been especially close to my heart have been ones that help children, seniors, and animals. And I actually recently kind of thought about the commonality of that, which is that those are populations that need people to take care of them sometimes,
Right.
because they can't take care of themselves. And so I think that's why those three areas have been so close to my heart, because they're the most vulnerable, I think, the most vulnerable folks. And so, but I've been an animal lover my whole life, dog lover my whole life. And, when the pandemic hit, I personally gave donations to, several organizations that were helping feed seniors, feed children. But as an ongoing thing, dog rescue has just always been my heart. I have Wiley, who I think everyone more people probably know Wiley than me at this
Right.
point. He's my little model. I think he's relieved that I finally made an Instagram for Chic and Regalness, because before that, he was responsible for modeling everything. And he actually doesn't love clothing. There was the great Blizzard standoff of like 2015 where he's a Chihuahua mix. He was like up to his chin in snow and would not walk until I took the booties off. Like we had like a standoff. I'm like, really? So I had to take the booties off, and then he like trudged through the snow. So, but I have now trained him for that. When I'm going to say it quietly now because he's sitting on the couch over there and I don't want to fake him out. I'll be like, do you want to do modeling? And he'll be like, yeah. And he'll start like scampering around, and I get like an entire 30-second window where he tolerates it, and then he gets like the extra special good treats.
Right.
So, if he really hated it, I wouldn't, but he kind of, I think we all get a kick out of it. Like me and Wiley and my husband, I get Wiley for 30 seconds, like wearing these shawls, like, and he's
Sounds like my children. They also tolerate it for very limited time.
Totally. So yeah, and I knew about so many rescues from just my history of putting together. There would be a Reader's Digest story that I wrote about the 25 most heartwarming rescue stories. So I now like got to know 25 different rescues, and the dog rescue specifically is close to my heart. Cats, of course, as well, but I'm going to start branching out to other, animal rescues as well. I have a shawl planned. I don't know how I got planned this far out with collaborations, but for like February or March of 2022, like I'm scheduled through them, like with Nanette's Weight Studio, and she has a little dog named Coco, a little Yorkie. And I said, do you want to pick the rescue? And she's like, for me and my daughters, we really like this rescue Paws. And I think that they, obviously I looked into them. They work with helping all sorts of animals. And so that's going to be beyond just the dogs and cats. And I'm really excited about that. And who knows what else will come up, because I love to ask people like, what's in animal rescue that is close to your heart?
So is that how you choose the next, because you change between the animal rescues, right? So
yeah.
Is that how you pick them?
Yeah, it's a number of ways. I started off with the ones that I know and loved, and then I kind of branched out to say, a lot of knitters have pets. And so, if I was working with someone, I'd say, hey, do you have a rescue you really love? Where's your dog from? Where's your cat from if they're a rescue? And go in that direction, and really, ask around. I'm constantly looking for new ones and constantly finding new ways. Like there was someone who posted one of the shawl you're wearing, and I got talking to her, and she told me where her little pup came from. And that's this month. It's called like Jake's Rescue. It's so I love seeing, what's always been hard for me is I'm extremely sensitive. And so I can't see any of the like before pictures of these pets before they get healthy and rescued. Like I can't, so for me, it's always like so special to know that there are people who really suck, who do these things to animals where they have to end up being rescued in shelters. And one thing I learned from my experience with trauma is, look for the positive. Like what's the positive of this? And the positive of this is there are so many amazing people working in animal rescue who are volunteers who save these dogs from Mexico, Puerto Rico. I mean, they're coming in from everywhere, or right here, like right in their neighborhood, wherever it is. And they say like, for every person that's like, I don't know what, I don't have it in me. I would never abandon an animal or anything or do anything to harm. But for every person, there's like 5 amazing people out there for each pet that are like, we're going to save your little life, and that's the part that makes me so happy. And,
well, it's also like the fact that you contributing to the after pictures.
Yeah.
Your
Oh,
design,
I
you
haven't
know?
thought about it that way. But yeah, it's great. And also, um, there's a couple of senior rescues where I'm like, oh, doubly great, where they come
Right.
in and they save the seniors and they let them live out their lives.
Yeah.
Those are the ones I'm at. It's emotional. Those are the ones to me that are just there are so many good people out there. And I think growing up with what I experienced and constantly looking for the people who are trying to hurt us as New York City, us as America, like the people who aren't great, like just the reassurance that there are very good people out there who
Right.
do very good things. And, that's actually my entire social media feed on Instagram and Facebook. I have managed to, through all my hard work and diligence, I only get like knitting and dog posts now in my feed. Like I don't get any nonsense. Like it's always, knitting related or dog related. And I'm like,
Right.
perfect, because that's happy place stuff, because there is certainly a lot on social media that is not happy and and pleasant. So I've worked it out so that's what it is for me, and so it's become a happy place and a
Right.
safe place.
So what's in the works besides the February of next year? Like, what are you working on now? What's your like closest plans?
Oh my gosh. So I'm one of those people who has 10 WIPs at once, but I don't abandon them, right? So I constantly rotating them. I have my personal projects, I have my design projects, and right now I'm really excited. I'm up to my finishing the samples on my several designs that are going to be coming out for September and October and November, with working with dyers on all of them, actually, in yarn companies. And one is a fade shawl. I'm really excited about that one. One of them is, oh my gosh, it's my first, I'm gonna say my first and last, but don't quote me on that, time doing tiny baubles I was like, why did these 2 rows take me an hour? I'm never doing this again to do
Right.
and it was like below 200 stitches, and I'm like doing the tiny baubles. And the thing that I've been struggling with is, and I'm totally the same way my mental health is an open book, I'm kind of an open book about my health too. And so I live with chronic migraine, and I've lived with that since I was 17, and have still looking for ways to help it and prevent it. Eastern medicine, Western medicine, like I guarantee you, anyone who asks me, have you tried this? I'd be like, well, how many times? Because
Right.
yes, and recently, unfortunately, this year, I've been dealing with a lot of new nerve pain that's actually affecting like my right arm and my hand and my wrist. And so it's slowing me down. And some days I can't knit. And I'm like, what am I even doing with my life? Why am I alive? Because if I can't write or knit or like talk to my friends, I'm just like staring at the wall, but so I'm trying to figure out how to make that as good as I possibly can too. And so I try to be really mindful of how much I'm committing myself to and for what span of time. But so far, like I'm still in a really good rhythm. I'm really excited about these shawls I have coming out. And it's interesting because I have another aunt who she actually learned to knit when she was younger, and then I won't age her, a large amount of time passed by, and a long time. And then when I learned, she wanted to relearn. And so I helped her after such a long time. And so, she keeps saying to me, she's like, all you make is shawls. Why don't you make a sweater? I'm like, well, I've made plenty of tops like knit in 2 pieces because I'm like concerned about the shaping and the other elements of it.
Right.
Because to me, like, it's funny, like I might be so advanced in certain areas, but like the idea of a garment where I have to do a sleeve, like that still is like so far beyond anything I do. But she's like, you keep making all these shawls, and I'm like, that's what people respond to. Like I've done some cowls and stuff like that, but the shawl knitting is just its own thing, I think.
Well, it's plus like you can't really screw up a shawl. Like it can be 10 times larger and it's still fine. Like you
Right.
can still wrap it around, it doesn't have to be precise size. It doesn't have to, like, you don't
You
have to
find a
match the
couple
dog.
friends and you all wear the shawl together. Yeah.
Well, you know, one of my first projects I've done. So my youngest son asked me to knit him a blanket. And I basically, like, I probably just knitted for a month before that. So I didn't even know about where you buy yarn. I thought you buy yarn at Michael's. So I went to Michael's, I bought a few different skeins of yarn. I started, like, I casted on what looked like a reasonable number of stitches. I started knitting, and I knitted for about a month, and I had to go back to Michael's a few times because I was running out of yarn. So I'm finally, like, knitting this blanket that's, like, got to the reasonable size. I'm starting to cast it off, and I realized that it's like stretches and stretches and stretches and stretches. And by the time I casted it all off, like, I thought I was knitting lengthwise. It happened that I was knitting widthwise, and I didn't even realize that. So the thing came to be 12 feet by 4 feet, something like that. Before
Wow.
blocking, but I didn't even know anything about blocking. So just like all the needles, it was like 12 feet long. So I have a picture. I'm actually gonna put it here. I have a picture where all 3 of my kids are wrapped in that blanket.
And the blanket. Yes, I wasn't too far off.
Right.
I think maybe there's a niche for, like, multi-person.
Right.
Multi-person.
It might be a new idea, new design idea.
Yeah. Friendship shawls, friendship, like,
Family shawl, COVID shawl.
Exactly.
You know. Well, thank you so very much. I'm going to post the links to all your Instagram and Ravelry page and everything. And I'm glad you're feeling okay today and we could squeeze that interview.
Yeah.